I don't know if this experience was unique to me or if it's shared among all Magic the Gathering players, but I still remember the first time I was so completely crushed by a deck that was more powerful than I had ever seen that it totally changed my perspective of the game as a whole. A deck that was so unbeatable that it just completely demolished everything I had thought I had learned up to that point. And today I want to talk about the deck that did that for me. We're going to talk about Carl's Reanimator deck. So let's start at the beginning. I learned to play Magic in 2002, and I did what many new players did in the times before digital Magic and high-speed internet. I built really crap decks. And I mean really crap decks. I lived in a small town, so there was no local game store to buy singles at, and this was long before people were comfortable buying things online, so every deck I built was constructed from cards that I opened in packs, and with so little experience in the game, my decks were filled with cards that I thought just looked cool. I mean, sure, a 3-mana 4/3 with Echo might seem unplayable today, and the cool thing is, it was unplayable back then too, but I put it in my deck because I thought it looked cool. I had no idea what synergy meant, I had no idea what a mana curve was, I just jammed my decks with piles of cool looking cards that I opened in booster packs. I'd open a pack, I'd see a card with a cool art, and I'm like, oh man, I'm putting that in my red-green deck. And of course, as time went on, I started to see the synergies. If I played things that tapped for mana early, I could play bigger things faster. If every single card in my deck dealt direct damage, I didn't need to worry about what was happening on the battlefield. I even tried to make Megrim decks work. It deals 2 damage every time the opponent discards, so naturally, I just filled my deck with every card I had in my collection that mentioned discarding, and it didn't work. It probably didn't help that I only had 2 Megrims, but you know, it's a learning experience. But then one day, my good friend Carl, and that is his real name, brought to school, this was in high school, a deck that completely blew my mind, and I'm still reeling from it 20 years later. So the deck starts with Entomb and Buried Alive. Entomb lets you search your library for a creature and put it into your graveyard, which seemed completely pointless. I mean, this was the set that had Threshold, but I mean, that didn't seem worth it to me. And Buried Alive could do the same thing but for 3 creatures. So as a new player who had never even heard the term Reanimator, I mean, I couldn't have possibly understood that there was any value in doing this, but around the same period, we also got things like Exhume and Zombify. Now, Exhume lets each player return a creature from the graveyard to the battlefield, and Zombify does the same thing, but just for the caster. This means that on turn 1, you could put anything in your graveyard, and on turn 2, you could put it right onto the battlefield. And the cards that were usually reanimated were things like Hypnox, Viscera the Dreadful, and Symbiotic Worm. None of the Hypnox's text matters because you're not casting it, it's just an 8/8 flyer. Viscera could literally just kill everything for the rest of the game because you'd get it on turn 2 and you know, no one was playing good mana curves, right? We were playing 1 creature per turn at best, and they would just kill everything forever. And Symbiotic Worm was played because if the opponent did have removal, which no one did, but if they did find a way to kill it, well, it just made a bunch of 1/1s. So it's fine. I don't know if my friend had Symbiotic Worm though, I'm pretty sure they were playing Verdant Force in its place, but the point is, these things were coming out on turn 2, and this was at a time in my Magic the Gathering journey when I was still trying to hard cast Scaled Worms, right? I mean, look how big it is. It's got so much power. It was so good. Granted, I had to wait 8 turns to cast it, but, you know, I believed one of the greatest creatures in the game was Thorn Elemental. It was a 7-mana 7/7 that if the opponent blocked it, it went straight to the face. I mean, that's just insane. But I had to wait until turn 7 to cast it, and meanwhile, Carl had an 8/8 flyer on turn 2. So, you know, it was a little bit better. And the sad part is, that's not even the worst of it, because remember that Buried Alive, it finds 3 creatures, right? And Zombify could be cast the following turn. So, one of the creatures you could get with Buried Alive was Rhea Dawnbringer. She returns a creature from the graveyard to the battlefield every single turn, meaning you used Buried Alive to find Rhea and 2 other creatures, and then Rhea would reanimate the other 2. And all of this was happening way before I could cast Thorn Elemental. I mean, literally the turn I cast Thorn Elemental, Carl would have Rhea Dawnbringer, Hypnox, and Verdant Force on the battlefield. I mean, it was just... it was very different. And the deck had plenty of redundancy too. It had extra reanimation spells. It had Putrid Imp, which could discard cards for no mana, so you could still discard big threats to reanimate. Like if you drew Exhume and Putrid Imp, you play Putrid Imp turn 1, you discard something, you reanimate at turn 2. Also, Vampiric Tutor was a thing, and much less expensive in 2002, which would let you find literally any card in your deck for 2 life and 1 mana, which was a pretty good deal, especially in a combo deck. And I know some of you might be wondering what format this took place in, and to that I say, format? What's a format? What do you mean? This was kitchen table Magic in 2002 at the lunchroom tables in a high school. I barely knew what formats were. By the way, back then, they didn't have very exciting names. There was Type 2, Type 1, and Type 1.5. I know, very, very exciting. So format didn't matter, and in my mind, this deck was just completely insane. I mean, it changed how I looked at deck construction. A lot of the cards in it were just not very individually powerful, right? Putrid Imp isn't exciting. Buried Alive, I mean, sure, you get halfway to Threshold, woohoo. Zombify seemed cool to me. Even as a new player, Zombify seemed cool, but like, you know, it wasn't that crazy. But man, it made me realize, you know, sometimes a deck is more than its individual parts, and also that removal was a thing that should exist in my decks. You know, who knew? Who knew I should play stuff that could, I don't know, kill a creature maybe? The deck definitely forced me to just reevaluate what made a good card in Magic. And what I want to know is this a common experience? Does this still happen in the day of Magic Arena Ranked, right? Do new players just download Magic Arena and you get your starter decks and maybe you just never have this experience now? Is it unique to paper Magic? And I'm not sure, but something I want to know is, did you have a similar experience? And if you did, what was the deck? I really want to know this. What was the deck that made you completely rethink the game? Like, oh, I'm just not playing anywhere near the power level of like competitive decks. For me, it was Carl's Reanimator deck in 2002 to 2003-ish. Do you have a similar deck? Let me know. But for now, thanks for watching everyone, and I will see you in the next one.